Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining us from Dave Campbell's Texas Football and texasfootball.com, the managing editor, Travis Stewart. How you doing, Travis?
I'm not too bad. It's playoff week and it's turkey week. All the teams playing now are having great weeks.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the idea of football 24 hours a day for about 5 straight days now.
Well, I mean, the only problem is that some of the kids and coaches don't really get that, right? Because they're obviously traveling for the holidays. And so this week of football presents a lot of really unique challenges for a lot of these coaches and kids to say, okay, well, how are we going to run through our standard practice sets? How are we going to run through our walkthroughs? When are we going to go over the playbook? When are we going to watch film of the opponent? So your whole schedule gets thrown off. So even though kids grow up dreaming that they'll end up playing on Thanksgiving, the day before, the day after, whatever, they get there and they realize, man, there's a lot of logistical challenges with this.
Oh, yeah. I was talking to several coaches this week, and, I mean, their biggest issue is just trying to get their kids to practice because a lot of them don't drive and they need rides and all this kind of stuff. And so it's things you just don't even think about that these guys have got to deal with in these kind of situations.
Yeah, and the coaches, they'll be the first ones to tell you, look, I will worry about that when I get there. I'm not going to worry about that at all until I'm in that week. Then I'll deal with it, and then I'll complain about it. But for right now, I'll worry about that when I get there.
Exactly. Okay, let's start college football first of all. I mean, we talked about this last week, but how do you figure Baylor to do what they did to the number 1 ranked Kansas State team last week?
You know what Baylor did is really simple once I had time to think about it. They just put together a performance that looked exactly like what the entire season would have looked like if their defense had done anything for most of the year. And I understand it was a work in progress, with Phil Bennett still trying to get the pieces in the right place. But once they did, and they put together a full defensive performance, they beat the number 1 team in the country, and they look great doing it. I mean, no one's doubted at all this year that their defense was a missing piece. They scored the ball again against Kansas State, but they've done that against everybody. But when they got those 3 goal line stops against Colin Klein, it became obvious, and to a certain extent, almost frustrating to look at that and think, gosh, if they've been doing this all year, who knows what we'd be talking about Baylor being right now.
It is incredible, and I love what Jake Shaw wrote about the idea of Baylor having a hand in the Heisman Trophy now 2 straight years with RG3 last year, and they may have clinched it for Johnny Manziel this year.
At this point, this is how we've more or less settled on it inside our little office. If they don't give it to Johnny, well, let me take a step back. There's obviously still anywhere between 2, 3, even 4 games left in a couple situations. Anything could still happen in that time frame. Manti Te'o could have an unbelievable close to the year. Who knows what he could do against USC, and it could end up winning him a Heisman. But if the season ended today, then if they didn't give it to Johnny, the only main reason I could think of would be if they just didn't want to give it to a freshman. Because the statistical, empirical evidence out there, they all roads point to Johnny football. And I know he's got 2 losses, but Robert won it last year with 3.
Exactly.
So there's precedent for that. It's very difficult to not give it to Johnny unless you wanted to not give it to him because he's too young, which is not a good reason.
Don't leave out the Notre Dame factor either.
Yeah, well, I wonder about that, and I've said that several times over the years. Is there's an older media base that will continue to lean on Notre Dame as a heavy hitter, when in reality, I mean, this is their first number 1 ranking, and I don't even remember the number, but it's a long time since they've been ranked number 1. So it's possible, but at the same time, even if there's a Notre Dame slant, a Notre Dame bias out there, it's probably evened out by the fact that Teo's a linebacker and defensive kids just don't win it.
Yeah, I think you just called me old.
I didn't call you old. You actually pointed out the Notre Dame bias, which means you're part of the young hip crowd.
No, it means I'm old. and we know that. That's fine. I can accept that. All right. The other thing that I find very interesting about this is now we're looking at a situation where it looked like it was Kansas State's Big 12 championship to win. And we were talking around here by the time the weekend's over, we could have a 4-way tie for first in this conference.
Yeah, what a mess that would be, wouldn't it? It just, and honestly, that's been the Big 12 all year. So why should we try and make it easy right at the end? It was always going to be a mess. What could really get things wonky would be if Texas ends up knocking off Kansas State. Yeah. Then things are going to get really weird, and maybe even more than the conference title, which obviously means a lot to these schools. There's all of a sudden a very large opportunity there for another school, like a Texas maybe, to jump up and snag an at-large BCS berth, depending on how things play out. Because it looks like, with Kansas State going to the championship game, that which we thought they would if they went undefeated.
Right.
But Kansas State going to the championship game, that would more than likely put Oklahoma or Texas in a free-for-all spot. But now that Kansas State is almost assuredly, they're probably not going to go to the title game. It'd be hard to imagine that they would. Well, now they're taking an at-large berth, and all of a sudden everyone's fighting for a second spot that we thought was a foregone conclusion. So conference title spot. So it's very unusual. It's thrown the conference into flux, but from the very beginning, that's what we thought the Big 12 was going to be this year.
And it's pretty incredible that Texas would be even thinking about a BCS game when you think about the troubles they were having back when they played Oklahoma.
Well, here's the really weird one. So the two teams, Texas and Oklahoma, are not that far apart in the rankings. There's some gap there, but not too much. If Oklahoma were to fall in Bedlam against Oklahoma State, and Texas were to knock off Kansas State, well, then all of a sudden you'd have a 3-loss Oklahoma team and a 2-loss Texas team. Well, there's a chance the Longhorns could lap them, and I'll be darned if in that scenario you might actually see the Longhorns in a BCS game, Oklahoma out, after Oklahoma beat them by half a century mark.
That's why I love college football, because it's just you can't even begin to think or dream these kind of scenarios, and they happen every year. It seems like the Bedlam Bowl, Oklahoma State at Oklahoma. I'm telling you, Travis, I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see Oklahoma State beat Oklahoma.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. And I think the reason why, and this has been a refrain I think I've been mentioning all year, is I have seen Oklahoma play its best against the opponents it hates the most, the ones it was the most motivated to beat, which was Texas, as always, that's a given, and then against the Texas Tech team that beat Oklahoma last year. So I think that you're probably going to see one of Oklahoma's best games of the year because Oklahoma State's a primary rival for them. The problem is that Oklahoma State right now is peaking. They are, at this point, they're essentially playing their best football of the year, and that's going to make them a very dangerous out against Oklahoma, which at times has been great offensively, and then from time to time has been a little bit mediocre. And if they throw one of their mediocre performances out there, Oklahoma State could just flat out score it, but we'll have to see.
And then you got the situation where Baylor's trying to get bowl eligible, and Texas Tech has started to slide here. Can you make any idea what happened to Tech?
It's tough to pinpoint one thing. I think it's a lot of things, but like we said at the very beginning of the year, too, they beat some good conference teams, there's no doubt, and they smoked West Virginia, but West Virginia ended up being a flop this year. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's been a bad year, and almost all the teams that Texas Tech beat in non-conference were cupcakes, or cupcakes, but just they were vastly inferior to what Tech was rolling out. So that's pretty much 5 games right there out of the 7.
Yeah.
So when they really got into the meat grinder of conference play, I think they started playing opponents at their level or better, and it started to expose them a little bit. They still do some things well, and Seth Doege is still a great quarterback who most people will forget about in 6 or 7 years because his senior year will be largely forgettable for the team. But I just don't know if they have enough pieces to really have been a BCS team this year like we thought, and maybe overreached for ourselves for a couple weeks ago.
So do you see Baylor winning this ball game?
I think they're going to win one of their last 2. They've got Texas Tech and Oklahoma State, and I think Baylor will beat one of them. It's possible they could lose both, be 5-7 and miss a bowl, and actually, another story for another time, they could be 5-7 and maybe even still make a bowl with how this year is playing out. But it's possible they could be 5-7 and miss. But when I look at the team, I just see a group that I think is good enough to be 6-6. And when we made our preseason predictions, we had Baylor, Texas Tech, and Oklahoma State all tied at 6-6. Well, we're going to miss Oklahoma State. They're going to be better than that. Tech's going to be at least a game better than that. Baylor could be a game below, at, or above it. But when I look at these teams, I still think they're all fairly balanced in some ways. Tech got undressed by Oklahoma State, but I think that was one of their worst performances of the year. So I still think that Baylor's going to be able to get at least one of these from these two teams.
And then the TCU-Texas game on Thanksgiving night, it's just not having the same kind of oomph that the A&M game would have had,
No, it's not. But at the same time, nothing was going to.
Right.
So I guess I can't really be disappointed by it because I wasn't expecting anything along the same lines. But I'm still excited about it, and I know TCU's stoked because this is a great opportunity for them. I mean, it's been a frustrating year. They're going to make a bowl, but it's been a frustrating year. They've lost so many players to injury and other reasons. But this can still be an opportunity to walk away with a really rosy feeling about their first year in the Big 12 besides just making a bowl. They can come in and say, hey, we took the flagship team in the state, which A&M is now seriously challenging to hold that title itself, but we took the flagship team in the state and we brought them down on their day in their stadium, because Thanksgiving is Texas's day. We brought them down on their day in their stadium with a roster of about a third of the kids that we thought we were going to have. I mean, They'll remember that for a good long time.
All right, high school football, what's on your radar?
Well, it's going to be a busy week. It's the area round now, second round, so we're down to about 300 teams, I guess, left still playing football. But there's a lot of heavy hitters out there, and East Texas actually has a couple of teams going head-to-head with a Wiley team. So John Tyler's got Wiley,
right,
and then White House has Wiley East, which is unusual for district rivals to both be seeing ISD rivals in the second round like that. But both are going to be good games. I think John Tyler should win, but White House is in for a much tougher task. We talked about Oklahoma State peaking in some ways. Well, Wiley East is a team with a future Oklahoma State player, wide receiver Marcel Aitman. Wiley East is peaking at the right time now, too, and that is not an offense you want to see. For sake of example, Wiley East quarterback Garrett McCain last week threw 7 touchdown passes. 7, 5 of them to that Marcel Aitman kid. So you know that's an offense with a couple key threats that you're just going to have to stay on top of, or else they'll bury you quicker than a wink.
And it's kind of I told Coach McFarland this week at White House, I said it's kind of like White House playing White House this week.
In some ways, yeah, except I think that White House has maybe a little more depth at wide receiver, and I think that even though Wiley East has 2 very good ones, but I think Wiley East has a better running back in Jabari Anderson. I think it's good. He's almost 1,600 rushing yards in the season now. When you pair that up with what they've done in the passing game, it's pretty remarkable. He's a straight-up burner, and once they get him into space, if he's got a straight line, I mean, he's going to go. So you've got to find a way to keep him in front of you and make him be moving laterally and definitely not north-south.
Now, where are you going to be this week?
We're actually going to be over here in Arlington for Abilene versus Arlington-Lamar, something we're excited about. You know, records, they kind of don't mean anything in the playoffs anymore, as we know. Abilene is 11-0. They've earned it. Arlington-Lamar has got a little rougher 6-5, but I think that Lamar's got a lot of the pieces you need to beat a team like Abilene. So I'm not going to go right out and call the upset, but I'm going to say there are some ingredients there and that people should be watching. Oh, and by the way, we're going to walk through, believe it or not, every single high school football game this weekend, all the way through private school through 11, man. We'll do every single one. Will be mentioned on Fox Football Friday on Friday. So we're going to be busy.
Wow. Hey, by the way, thank you for the shout-out on TexasFootball.com on our White House Ennis game this past week. We had a blast.
Well, sounded like you did, too. I mean, Pat Mahomes throws a Hail Mary pretty much with his eyes closed to take a lead at halftime. Of course we're going to play that clip. You did all the hard work. All we did was just listen.
Well, it was great stuff. And then the play at the end of the ball game, when you think Ennis is getting ready to go in and either take this thing to overtime or win the ball game outright, and then to have a sack, a fumble, and it returned for a touchdown about 60 yards. 2 incredible plays at the end of each half. I've never seen anything like that.
That was about a doomsday scenario as possible for that play for Ennis, wasn't it?
It's unbelievable.
You think you have a chance to take the lead and win it right at the end, and instead you're sitting behind by double digits after a play like that. Uh-oh.
With 7 seconds to go in the game. Incredible.
What a gut punch.
Love high school football, I can tell you that.
That's why we do it, right?
Absolutely. Hey, thanks very much for coming on. Happy Thanksgiving to you and all the guys over at Texas Football, okay?
You too, Brian. We appreciate you, pal.
Thank you, buddy. Travis Stewart, the managing editor of Dave Campbell's Texas Football and TexasFootball.com on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.